So a few months back, I did a couple of Q&A episodes where we gathered questions from listeners, from people on my email list, and they were great. Again, we filled 2 episodes, tons of great questions, but I got a bunch of questions about franchising from both sides, right? Questions on the franchisor side saying, hey, I've got a brand, I want to grow it and eventually franchise it. What do I need to know? What do I need to do? And then they had specific questions in that area. And then people were on the franchisee side too, saying, hey, I want to buy into a franchise. What should I be aware of? What's the best way to do it? Admittedly, I know very little on this topic. I've spent my entire career working at the independent level, right? Independent owners, operators, some multi-unit groups, but really I have no experience with franchising. So what you got to do is admit when you don't know enough. I don't know enough to be an expert on this subject, but I pulled together a panel of experts. This week and next week, I'm sharing this conversation all about today. It's all about the franchisee side. Next week, it's all about the franchisor side. Tons of value on this week and next week. We take a deep dive. Don't go anywhere. There's an old saying that goes something like this. You'll only find 3 kinds of people in the world. Those who see, those who will never see, and those who can see when shown. This is Restaurant Strategy, a podcast with answers for anyone who's looking. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Chip Close, and this is Restaurant Strategy, a podcast dedicated solely to helping you build a more profitable and a more sustainable business. Each week, I leverage my 20 plus years in the industry to help you build that more profitable and more sustainable enterprise. I also work with owners and operators all over the world through my P3 Mastermind program. What are the 3 Ps? They stand for profit, process, and progress. If you've got a restaurant that's been around for a year, at least over a year, if you're generating a ton of revenue but still struggling to get consistent, predictable 20% profits, then I urge you to get in touch. That is the problem we solve. Those are the people that we work with. Best way to do that is to visit restaurantstrategypodcast.com/schedule. Set up a free 30-minute strategy session with me. I'll get to learn more about you and your restaurant. You'll get to learn more about the program, ask some questions about the program to see if you're a good fit for the program. Again, there's no pressure to join. That's just a free call. We get to know each other. Hopefully, you'll come away with some value. And if you want to move forward, we can certainly talk about those next steps. The best way to get started is to, again, schedule a call with me. restaurantstrategypodcast.com/schedule. As always, you'll find that link in the show notes. Now, thousands of restaurants across the country use Kickfin to send instant cashless tip payouts directly to their employees' bank accounts the second their shift ends. It's a really simple solution to a really big problem. Because let's face it, paying out cash tips to your workers day after day, shift after shift is kind of a nightmare. Tedious tip distribution makes managers away from work that matters. It's hard to track payments, which leads to accounting and compliance headaches. Plus, cash tip outs create the perfect opportunity for theft. And there's never enough cash on hand to pay out those tips, so managers are constantly having to make bank runs. Bottom line, there's never been a secure, efficient way to tip out until now. Meet Kickfin. Kickfin is an easy-to-use software that sends real-time, cashless tip payouts straight to your employees' bank accounts 24/7, 365. Tipping out with Kickfin gives managers and operators hours back in their day. It makes reporting a breeze and protects your business from mistakes and theft. And guess what? Employees love it, so it's one of the best recruiting tools out there. Best of all, restaurants can have Kickfin up and running overnight. Employees can enroll in seconds, no hardware, no contracts, no setup fees. Get in touch today for a personalized demo and see how restaurants and bars across the country are tipping out with Kickfin. Visit kickfin.com/demo. As always, you'll find that link in the show notes. Now, today's episode is unique. I've got 3 guests, not just one, and we're going to talk all about franchising. So it's like a franchising roundtable because I know very little about this. I have spent my entire career working with independent operators, some multi-units, some at like the group or small chain level, but for the most part, I haven't really worked with franchises. And more and more listeners are asking me, about franchises, and I feel ill-equipped to answer those questions adequately, so I'm not going to try to. I'm pulling a bunch of smart people into the show with me, and this is actually a two-part episode. The first part's going to be today. The second part's going to be next week. Today, we're going to focus all on the franchisee side, right? So you're thinking, hey, I want to open a restaurant. Do I open my own concept, my own brand, or do I buy into a franchise? Do I become a franchisee? We're going to talk all about that. And then next week, we're going to talk about the other side, being a franchisor, right? Hey, I've got a brand. I think it'll scale. What do I need to do to take it to the next level? And I've got this panel gathered for both this week's episode and next week. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to everybody, and then I'm going to let them introduce themselves, really talk about who they are, where they come from, and what makes them qualified to talk about what we're about to talk about. Lauren Fernandez, Troy Hooper, Darryl Sangster, welcome to the Restaurant Strategy Podcast. I appreciate you all being here.
Thank you very much, Chip.
Happy to be here.
As always, Chip, good to see you again.
My pleasure. Okay, so let's start with Darryl, because Darryl's the one that I was introduced to. I know Troy, he's been on the show. I know Lauren, she has been on the show. But Darryl, you are new to me, so I'm going to start with you. Tell me about who you are, how you got started, what makes you so qualified to talk on this subject.
Yeah, so franchising has been my professional career. So I started in the industry. I was a franchisor myself of my own system and brand and manufacturing and distribution of retail supplement stores. And I did that for a lot of years, ended up selling that. And now I'm in the franchisee consulting space. I'm presently, even today, I'm also a franchisee in another system, just on investment level. So I've been both the franchisor as well as the franchisee, and the industry is something that I understand. So
perfect,
and I enjoy it. Yeah.
Great. I can't wait, because I'm going to learn more about this and hopefully be better for the clients that I work with. I appreciate you being here, Lauren. Give your little spiel. Give some people some context, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am the CEO and founder of Full Course. We are an early stage investor, incubator, and accelerator of growth for restaurant and food brands. And I am actually a former general counsel of Focused Brands, where I was for many years before I started my own journey in entrepreneurship and became a multi-unit franchisee in the Chicken Salad Chick system. So I have the unique perspective of having been both a multi-brand franchisor and been on the franchisee side as well as an entrepreneur, and now invest in that as a structure for growth for our own clients. So I'm so happy to be here and share some of my perspectives on this space.
For sure. I'm thrilled to have you here. Thanks for coming back. If anyone hasn't listened to the episode, it didn't happen all that long ago. Episode 209, I think it is, with Lauren, and it's an outstanding conversation. For the most part, I just try to get out of the way and let her be smart for the listeners, and she very much was that. Troy Hooper, give some people some context, who you are, what you do.
Former chef, 30-year operator, all facets of restaurants in hotels, private clubs, resorts, building new, revamping old. Last 6 years focused specifically on the emerging concept groups, usually 3, 5, 10 location brands that want to scale. We have a great team at Kiwi Restaurant Partners who have 30 to 40 years each of operating, building, and expanding franchise concepts in the quick service, fast casual space, predominantly with some casual as well. So we have a fantastic brain trust of folks that I have the great fortune of leading on my team, and we help the small emerging franchise concept get set up their systems correctly, and build their concept out through the model. And we love being an educator, and I'm a fantastic fan and mentee. She doesn't know it, but of Lauren's. And Darryl, great to meet you, and happy to be here. Thanks, Chip.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, excellent. Let's. I think we've got a collective wisdom and experience that dwarfs many other panels. So I think it's really cool that you guys all agreed to take time out of your day to do this. Here's a good place to start. Lauren, just on the surface, how do you explain, right? So how would you explain to somebody who says, hey, I love restaurants. I've worked in restaurants for a while. I'm ready to take some ownership. I want to be in charge. When does it make sense to become a franchisee as opposed to being an independent and opening your own place?
Yeah, I think, and I will say this with absolute reference for the hundreds of thousands of independently owned restaurants that are out there. The vast majority of restaurants out there actually are independently owned and operated. So I think that's an important designation. We have a tendency to look around and think that they're all franchised, but they're not. And I chose that path for myself because I was a first-time entrepreneur in a restaurant context. I had been a successful entrepreneur in other businesses. And as an executive in this space, I think I knew enough to know that I didn't know what I was doing. And I really looked at that franchise opportunity as opposed to doing an independent concept as a way for me to have a guided and safer path to entrepreneurship in a space where I didn't necessarily have the specific operational experience, the brand know-how, etc. So a lot of that legwork was done for me. It had been tested by the franchisor. And I also wanted to come into a community where I could learn not just from our managers and the units that we purchased, but from the franchisor and from the other franchisees. For me, the decision to sign on with Chicken Salad Chick was largely driven by that community. The founder's story was very front and center. It was very much a purpose behind the brand, and I felt that from the other franchisees as well. So I think that's an important thing to note. You're not just buying into a system. I think in really great franchise organizations, you're buying into a community. When they're really run like that, I think there's something really special that happens there.
So, Darryl, I want you to jump on what Lauren was saying. I think I have a sense of it, but I'm sure I don't understand the full scope of it. So Lauren was just talking about, being a first-time entrepreneur in the food space, and I knew I didn't know everything. What is everything? What are the things that a franchisee gets if you're the first time into it that you don't have to build from scratch per se?
Yeah, so, the beauty behind the franchising industry is the fact that there's systems in place and that other people have built these systems. And breaking that down a little further, what that really means is all of the pain and the mistakes somebody else has incurred and learned and developed. And then those systems end up creating that franchise. So independence, a lot of times, it's again, there's a choice to learn on your own and work with colleagues and stuff, but you're still experiencing the growth of your business through pain and mistakes, which is natural and human. But in a franchise system, you do bypass that. Like Lauren said, there's the team component, which is a huge aspect from an emotional support side, but also the systems that are in place allow you to bypass those mistakes, and you can literally shave years off of the learning curve through a franchise system.
So Troy, you're my systems guy. You're all about this, and we spent a great deal of time talking about this on the episode that you came on to the show. We talked a lot about leadership and systems, and we'll get into this a lot next time. When we talk about the franchisor side and sort of what the responsibility is to the franchisee. But again, taking the perspective of the franchisee, what sort of systems do they need to, and how do you tell if you're going to come in, you're going to buy into a franchise system? How can you tell whether everything is really dialed in and all in place, or how can you tell if only half the stuff that should be in place is into place? Do you know what I'm asking? Is that, I don't even know if that's the right question.
Yeah, that's really spot on. I think takes the conversation to the next step, which is investigation, right? Your due diligence. to Lauren's point, how do you know there's a community if you don't really dig into it? This is not a buy a car scenario. It's not buy a house scenario. It's buying a business, and your investment is going to be significant. It's going to be lengthy. You're committing to a long period of relationship. So you really need to dig in. And I guess my cautionary / educational tale is spend the time, but force the franchisor to spend the time with you as well, right? Make sure that it's not all surface and fluff and marketing materials and pretty pictures and taglines and stories. Really force them to engage with you at the highest levels of the organization. Quite frankly, you got to get past the sales development manager and really talk to people inside the organization that you're going to be working with. The number one thing we talk about after that initial introductory period and investigation is what we call validation, right? This is where you actually are introduced to, or even on your own, seek out existing franchisees in the system. And you interview them. You ask them sort of the tough questions. You ask them, hey, has all the promises been met? Or what innovations have they brought to the table? Or, do you see this brand as being competitive going forward against what's coming up in the marketplace? And then certainly you get into more nitty gritty where they can actually show you stuff, demonstrate, walk you around, tour you, and even potentially even share with you their numbers in the financial aspect of it. So that's really the next step, and that's where we see a lot of prospective franchisees and some franchisees who've signed into systems not really understand they need to go deeper than the sales pitch or sort of the tour that the brand takes you on, the journey they take you on. You really have to go deeper into every aspect of the consideration, and in that you'll really learn what some of the things Lauren was really honing in on and Darryl touched on as well. So
I want to talk briefly about probably not briefly, but I want to. You mentioned the numbers. Let's talk about the numbers, because I know there are all kinds of rules about what can and can't be shared. Somebody who's looking at this and saying, hey, yeah, I'm thinking I want to, what can they expect to be able to see, and what should they expect to not be able to see? Lauren, can you speak to that for a second?
Yeah. So in my many years as counsel in this space, I will tell you the magic happens in what's called a franchise disclosure document. That's an FDD. It's a regulated document with federal rules under the FTC, and that requires a franchisor to disclose in a very specific way certain financial metrics, and also, for example, the names of all current and past franchisees. And to Troy's point, do your homework. I think that's the number one piece of advice I could give everyone is thoroughly read the FDD. You are allowed to ask for the supporting documentation for where those numbers came from, and you should be asking for that. I think also flip to the back where those appendices are with the required disclosures of all the current and past franchisees, and don't forget to call both. If they will pick up the phone, I think it's willing, have a structure with how you have that conversation. Hi, I'm a prospect. I have 5 questions I want to ask you. Can I have 15 minutes of your time? And be very purposeful in how you ask those questions. Ask for the good, ask for the bad. But I think what's also very telling is when people will not pick up the phone, and I want to highlight that as a piece of information, is often franchisees who don't answer the phone are not answering the phone for a reason. So if you see a pattern developing, I think you should pay even deeper attention to why folks are not willing to talk to you and help bring you in to the family, right? That's part of what we do in franchising. And if you are in a good system where the franchisees are happy, they will be the first ones to tell you that they're happy and welcome you aboard, right? The more the merrier. So I think definitely read through your franchise disclosure document. Do not be afraid to ask questions, ask for supporting information, and take those extra steps. I want to double down on what Troy said and make those phone calls, do your own investigation, do your own visits, and really kind of do your homework too.
So, Darryl, I want to take this conversation on the heels of that and say, what sort of support, right? Typically, you get a bunch of support from the mothership, as I sometimes say. where are areas that you typically won't get support that where you still will have to sort of prop yourself up on your own?
From a franchisee perspective, your support will likely come in, the marketing, the setup, how to manage and operate your business. Where I see some of the support lacking is in the behind the scenes, the back end of business developments. A lot of times there's a lot of focus on the operational side, but not necessarily on the structured back end side, the accounting side, the bookkeeping side, the business nuts and bolts side of running and owning a business. So that would probably be where that is. A lot of times, in the franchise world, you're dealing with a lot of personalities, and some franchisees are extrovert and introvert, and some are aggressive and some are passive, and each one, the franchisor, has to be able to read and adapt to who they are as an individual, because everybody does learn differently. So, my answer to that question would be, I believe that the back end side of most franchise systems is where it could use a little lift.
Interesting. So we sort of said this, and I just want to sort of bring it to a point, make sure I understand it. The franchisee path is right for somebody who just has never done it before, has never run it. Once sort of a done for you system, and at its best case, the franchisor can say, this works. You follow the system, you do what we tell you to do, when to do it, how to do it, this is why we do it. Follow everything here, and you will succeed. Is that a fair, and I'll pose this to the entire group, whoever wants to jump in, is that a fair assessment, that that's what should be in place?
Yeah, I'll add this to it. I think that that's a fair assessment, Chip. But I'll also say, as someone who's scaled within a franchise system, I had a goal to be a multi-unit operator. And so for me, the beauty of it wasn't just learning the ropes, but becoming a ninja at it so that we could rapidly scale and grow our own business and create value for my partners and for our employees. So there's also that angle as well. It's not just about that first unit and learning to cut your teeth. I think that sometimes franchise systems can be a beautiful vehicle for growth within your own company. And I've seen many multi-unit franchisees even diversify into multiple brands as well, and leverage their own infrastructure to help support a second franchised concept where they do the same thing over again. And there's a tremendous amount of return of investment when you get to scale, over, let's say, 10 units or so. So I think that that's also another thing to be thinking about when you go down the runway, right? The systems that are in place lend themselves to growth that's more accelerated as well.
Yeah, Chip, I'll jump in and say that.
Please do.
Everything we're saying sounds a little rosy in a lot of ways. At the end of the day, you're still a business owner. I'm pulling off of what Lauren started really going down on is you are a business owner. You are running this company. These are your employees. A roadmap and a foundation and a playbook and a lot of support materials are provided. But at the end of the day, to Lauren's point, you have to make this your own. And the best franchisee scenario is one where you take your learnings and share them. And in her experience at Chicken Salad Chick is a great example where they were a very tight-knit community. Not every brand has that, nurtures that, fosters that, encourages that. But some franchisee groups get together and create their own community within a brand, and that's great. So they're all a little different, and you got to find what works for you. But don't forget that this is not a done for you on a day-to-day. You still have to get up, put your shoes on, and turn on the lights and keep the business humming. You just have the advantage of the previous learnings we've referenced and the materials that are provided.
Now, POPMENU has reimagined the restaurant. They're breaking the mold of the menu, taking the kitchen doors off the hinges, and serving up their most comprehensive technology solution yet, POPMENU Max. It comes with the previous ingredients that we've mentioned here on this podcast, right? Websites designed with SEO, marketing tools to keep you top of mind with guests, and of course, the patented interactive menu technology. This new recipe brings automated phone answering, third-party online order aggregation, waitlisting, and more to the table. POPMENU's phone answering technology, for example, has your ringing phones covered. With artificial intelligence, the simple questions that used to keep your phone line tied up can now be handled without pulling a staff member from your in-person hospitality. No more missed reservations, no more asking for your hours or missed revenue, and that's just the beginning. You have a passion for food, POPMENU has a passion for technology. Together, it's a recipe for restaurant success. Now, even more digital ingredients are in their technology pantry, and POPMENU is helping restaurants attract, engage, remarket, and transact with their guests on a whole new level. Trust me, if you're a restaurant owner, you need POPMENU to take your business to the next level. For a limited time only, get $100 off your first month, plus you lock in one unchanging monthly rate. Go to popmenu.com/restaurant strategy to claim this offer. Again, that's $100 off your first month at POPMENU.com/restaurant strategy. Again, that link is in the show notes. So talk to me about, and again, I'll sort of pose this to the entire group. Talk to me about one key venture, and Darryl, you sort of brought this up, which is what prompted me to say this, right? That sort of the back end side is sometimes lacking in the franchises that you've seen. And I don't know if Troy and Lauren would agree with that or disagree with that, and I'm sure it's probably you get all different sides of the spectrum. But a franchisee has franchise fees or royalties or something back to the mothership. Talk to me about sort of I don't want to say constraints in a bad way, but it's a constraint. Talk to me about the constraints that puts on a business and how that sort of limits profitability and how that has to be considered. And Darryl, if you want to jump in first, since you sort of brought this up, and then I'll let the others weigh in too.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm a franchisee myself. So right now I pay royalties. I pay them for an exchange of a service. So I don't look at it, of course you have to calculate it into your decision to get into business. But at the end of the day, I'm happy to pay those royalties so long as I continue to get the support, which is what I want. So in my scenario, it's an investment. So I did fall into the plug and play. I was looking for an investment. So I didn't want a 9-to-5 job. That wasn't my objective. But I looked at a different franchise model for that so that I could invest some money, follow their system, pay their royalties, and get a return. And so, from that perspective, that's kind of, how my story came together within regards to the franchisee side.
Troy, Lauren, you guys jump in. Let's talk about these royalties, and I want to understand what they do to the business.
Ladies first, always, Lauren.
Troy, you want to go first? Oh, okay. So I think the most obvious example of this where I see it is with ad fund, right? So most franchisees also pay into some kind of ad fund that supports the marketing for the business. Now, obviously, when you're in the early stages of franchising, you're not going to have a very large ad fund, right? Because you don't have that many franchisees. But as that pool grows, as do the sophistication of the marketing services and the scope of services that can be provided all the way through social media support to a catering program, let's say. And I think one thing to understand is that's a lot of overhead for a franchisor. It's very expensive to build out a team that supports not only company stores, but franchised units as well. And I caution clients all the time. I mean, once you get past 10 units, you're looking at north of $2 million in overhead easily. And so lots of folks build franchise systems thinking that, it's just going to be a royalty stream all day long and miss the point that you have to actually provide support to those franchisees, right? So I think that what I will say is, as a franchisee, pay attention to the maturity of the franchisor, how long they've been around and the size of the franchise community and what the path for growth looks like. You can ask questions about, what the expected openings are for the next year. What does it look like and forecasted for the year after that? And it'll help you gauge the momentum of the franchisor as you're even signing on. And it's okay to sign on early. There are some benefits. You might get a lower franchise fee. The royalty might be a little lower. The territories might be better. There's lots of reasons to jump on the bandwagon early, but be aware that you are going to be on a growth journey with that franchisor too. So their scope of services and the depth and breadth of those services may grow and get better over time. But I think you have to be wide awake as to what that looks like for you personally. And can you make up that gap if the marketing isn't everything that you want it to be right away? Can you afford to make up that gap with your own resources internally and with the franchisor's approval? So I'll just give that as one example.
Yeah, I would really, that's the biggest piece of it. Goes back to my comment of it's your business, you've got to run it. Whatever you get from the franchisor, all great, helpful, informational, inspiring, whatever it is. But are you in a system that it lets you do some of those things on your own, and to what degree? There are brands that are very restrictive in the use of the IP, and there are brands, when you're in early, that are very glad to have the help. Really happy for you to pour in, not only financially, but creatively, and help prove what messaging works in different markets. And hopefully they're allowing you to own your market in a way that you're the expert. That's why they gave you that territory. So maybe things are going to be a little bit different for their brand in your territory. So these are all considerations in the sort of dating process in the pre-due diligence era that you've got to really think about a little bit more deeply and ask yourself and be honest with yourself, who am I as a business owner, operator? What do I need out of this system? And what do I want to bring to the system? And is this a fit that matches all of those elements?
I love that. And that sort of goes back to what Lauren was saying, right? And you guys have all said it in your own way, but come armed with, Lauren, you said specifically, like, ask for 15 minutes of their time, come up with only the most important questions. Is this going, like, you got to do a little bit of fishing, to see what sort of support, what does that look like? How restrictive or open is this? Part of this is, there are some national brands that just have a social media presence, that just have a national presence, and they don't want the franchisees to start their own Instagram accounts. They don't want them to open, the whatever it is, Pittsburgh, whatever it is, Memphis. It's like, nope, it's covered by the whole thing. And certainly we can extrapolate that out. There are companies that handle all of the email marketing. And so the franchisee can't collect an email list. They're actually restricted from emailing, to your point, Troy, about the IP. Is this sort of what we're talking about to drill down and get specific?
Yes and no. Yeah. So I'll quickly just kind of clarify. So yeah, there are more sophisticated. I think the more likely you are to get that level of restriction, Chip, the more nationwide, the more robust and mature that brand is going to be, right? There is just more brand equity that's accrued over time. Yeah. There are more people's revenue streams at stake. Often those brands are leveraging their intellectual property onto product lines and other licensing agreements and, co-branded agreements that have nothing to do with the franchise system. So their control over the intellectual property isn't just about the franchisees. It's about the larger protection of the brand as its ecosystem grows, right? And, pardon, but I'm an intellectual property attorney by training, so I can't unthink it. Like, that's how I look at it. And having worn that hat while at Focus Brands, I will tell you, like, that's very important to protect all of the revenue streams coming into the brands, not just the franchise one, but you have to take the franchisees into consideration. I think the point here is if the brand is early on, the scope of services might be narrow. You should get what you need: operational support, basic training in the brand, some kind of field visits, obviously, and certainly marketing support. And I could keep going, but I think those are kind of at the core of what we're talking about. What I'm suggesting is as the brand grows over time, as do those services and the tone and the tenor of them, the level of control. And it's just because, frankly, more money is at play. There's more money to work with and more brand equity has accrued as well, if that makes sense.
So I want to go back, and this is really good. And I started up the whole thing saying I don't know anything about anything. So I'm sort of asking the questions that come to me and tell me I'm wrong or asking it wrong. I love it. It's great. You guys have, a couple of you have said this, like, at the end of the day, though, it is still your own business. You can't fully rely on. So let's talk briefly about that. When is, if it's more restrictive, it's usually because it's a larger brand and there's more brand equity, et cetera, et cetera. I can imagine, maybe I'm wrong, tell me, I can imagine there are instances when that's less helpful at the individual unit level when they're trying to, carve out space in their own small market. Or is that not the case? Is that typically bigger really is better, and you don't want all that control? Just focus on what you're doing. Stay in your lane. I don't know where the question is in there, but that's sort of where I'm thinking. You guys tell me.
Go ahead, Darryl.
Yeah. So on the topic of that, I have to agree with Lauren on there's the young and emerging franchise systems are young, so they don't understand yet how to control this brand, which is literally unknown at this stage. So then their fees are lower, and usually they will negotiate on different things. But yet, in order to become that massive brand, they will, just like a franchisee, have to learn and evolve into a control mechanism to protect that brand. All the major systems in the world run off of a very controlled and tight ship. And there's a reason, as Lauren even mentioned, there's a lot of avenues to that brand to protect. So, in my opinion, it's not one is better than the other. It's to be very aware that if you're getting into a young and emerging franchise system, just be aware of that and learn together and be aware that your royalties will likely be less and your fees and getting into the marketplace will likely be, if you're new, you're going to get prime real estate, all those things in comparison to if you're the 1500th store on the market, you're not necessarily getting the best piece of real estate.
Yeah. Chip, to your question, yes, the bigger the ship, the slower it moves, right, or turns, right. So we do find franchisees get frustrated sometimes when, as this thing if they got into a large system or the system has gotten large while they were there, they got used to sort of a certain level of autonomy, a certain level of input and influence, and that sort of dilutes over time. Or they get into a large system and they sort of push against the grain and they're not going to win. And so that is an area of consideration when, yes, the security and lower risk environment of a larger brand is a benefit, but maybe the fresh and newness and flexibility of a smaller brand, fits your personality and what you're looking for. So what we're saying is there's a lot of things to consider, right? There's a lot of variables.
As I'm listening to you guys talk, you guys are talking from experience, and even I've got no experience really on the franchise side, but I certainly have experience in the industry, and so you sort of know what to ask. And even you said, you got to do your research, you got to learn. But it seems like you need somebody in your corner for this. Just as I'm listening to you, and now maybe it's the other franchisees that are that network. But as you're starting to do your research, because I was going to ask a question about hey, how would someone get started, and what are the steps? And you've all said in your own way, it requires research. But you also need somebody, it seems to me, to sort of help you suss this out and to tell you, what you should be looking at, so to speak. Is that fair? You're all nodding your head. Feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, I think, in evaluating brands, not only when we invest in them and in their ownership, but when I was evaluating brands for my own personal investment as a franchisee, I brought to the table my own lens with which to look at these deals, right? I knew what to look for in the financials, but there were equally as many things I didn't know to look for, and I've now learned through experience, right? So I am a fan, if you've never done this before, of working with a franchise broker who can bring to the table a deep understanding of what you're looking for as a business owner. To go back to the point that we started this whole thing on, franchising is guided entrepreneurship. You are building a small business. And so if you can work with someone who can work almost as your coach and your Sherpa and your guide in this process, and really deeply understand what you can bring to the table, what your strengths and your attributes are, and help pair you with opportunities that may be a better fit, I think that that's really huge. I had the benefit of a mentor who helped me identify some areas where, look, I was not an operator at the time. I didn't know how to run a kitchen. I had no idea how to measure food costs. I knew what a P&L was, obviously, but I needed to go into a brand that had a little bit more elegant simplicity and effectiveness in the kitchen side of it, so that I didn't get buried and overwhelmed running kitchen operations in 3 different restaurants I was buying, right? So that's an example of making sure you have alignment with your own skill set, room to grow, of course, but making sure that it's a good fit even before you start really deeply evaluating the brand. Because I'll tell you right now, one thing that was off the table with me from the beginning was a full service restaurant. It just wasn't going to happen. You weren't going to go from lawyer Lauren to full service operator overnight. I knew better, right? So I think there's something there, and I think if you can't really work with mentorship and other folks in this space who have that experience, find a broker who's willing to do that journey with you. And that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think the answer is and. The analogy is, don't buy a house without a realtor. There's all kinds of realtors, and there's all kinds of experience and non-experience, and there's all, but that realtor knows that market or that niche, whether you're in luxury or condo or campsite, whatever it is you're trying to buy. You need somebody who understands the market and understands the legalities and the what, to point out the landmines. And so whether that's a broker, an independent advisor, a consultant, it doesn't matter. It's really about a relationship and getting what you need. Just keep in mind that the franchisor sales development manager, the person presenting this information to you, represents a brand and is trying to do a job and sell you the dream. And that's great. And some are more cloudy and lofty, and some are more realistic, and some are very informative, and some are not going to tell you anything they don't have to tell you. So it's quite varied. And brokers can be the same way, but it's really about find that relationship. And I think to Lauren's point as well, and you should also have a brand mentee. If you narrow this down to 2 or 3 brands or 1 or 2 brands, or you're pretty sure about going with a particular system, you need to find somebody who's already there that can sort of help be a guide, be a coach. And quite frankly, if you have to pay him for God's sakes. But you need kind of both sides of that bookends of that information input, not only to give you great advice and information on the front end, the pre-purchase, but after the fact as well.
Yeah, I love that. Darryl, anything you wanted to add here?
Yeah, and you know what, the mentor side, the broker side, the advice and the guidance is absolutely where it's at, and I'm sure Lauren and Troy have both been hit up by friends and colleagues, wanting to get in and stuff like that. I know, I don't know how many coffee dates I've been out on just to pick your brain about this or that franchise, and most people in the industry will supply that knowledge and that direction. I wouldn't ever advise anyone to try to get into a franchise and figure this out on their own, seek the support of somebody like a Lauren or a Troy or myself or a broker, or a combination of somebody that in the industry to tap into that knowledge and guidance, because there are personality traits that come into this, and what do you want as a business for franchising? There's just so much in it that I would absolutely say that the mentor side and the broker side is a key to this. Of course, the calling of the franchisees, Lauren touched base on this. It's absolutely a red flag. A franchise system that is growing has happy franchisees. A franchise system that's not growing doesn't have happy franchisees, and there's a reason. So there's a reason they're not picking up their phone and talking to you, or you're if you're trying to extract information off the FDD and call these guys and you're not reaching them. There's reasons behind that. So it's pretty simple. When a franchisee is making money and happy in their culture, they're going to tell everybody, and they're going to welcome you in, and the more the merrier. The brand gets bigger, their own investment gets bigger, everything. So
this is maybe a Pollyanna question, but I'll ask it anyway. What sort of timeline is realistic, aside from the build out and all of that? Like, when you say, hey, yep, this is what I want to do, how long does that process typically take to onboard with a franchise and say, yep, you're on board, now you can start building your thing? And talk to me a little bit about that process, because I feel totally in the dark about it.
So go
I was just going to say, that's a loaded question, Chip, because construction takes forever now. I think we're still seeing some echoes of, supply chain issues on construction and labor. I think what would be fair is, let's say you've vetted a brand, you've decided to sign a franchise agreement, you should set aside at least 2 months for training for both you and for your management team if there are more than one person or persons running the operation, right? So often you have to have a couple levels of certification even within your own organization of who is allowed by the franchisor to run the location, right? So there's that.
Okay.
I tell people to budget at least 18 months to a year for development, and that includes the training process, but that's sourcing real estate, design. I think on the long side of things, it's definitely a 2-year journey. I think on the shorter side, maybe 18 months, maybe. And that's perhaps if you got a turnkey location or you're converting an existing location, things can happen that move a little faster. But it doesn't just happen overnight. Now, look, all different types of franchises exist out there. Some of them are service-based. Not all of them are restaurants. There's a wide swath in there that we're talking about. But in the land of kind of QSR and fast casual, that's what I would say in my experience.
Yeah. Darryl, you had something to add to that.
Yeah, no, I agree. The length of time is a massive variable. From a franchisor communicating with the franchisee perspective in the onboarding, I think it is critical that the franchisor understands what their typical timeline is so that they can make some statements and some promises to their new franchisee, knowing full well that, this is going to be, typically an 8 to 12 or 16 month process, whatever that case may be. Because again, there's months of lease and development negotiations that are completely uncontrollable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll back up and cover the front end of this question, which is the sales investigative due diligence journey. On average today for a restaurant salesperson, so somebody who's representing a franchisor and a brand and starting to have a conversation with you day one, that journey for most brands is on average 5 months right now.
Ooh,
so that's they might give you a map. I even see on some of the websites there's a little bit of a journey map, and they'll say 2 weeks to do this, 3 weeks to do that. They give you a window to do your own due diligence and your FDD review and all that kind of thing. Then they go to legal. They kind of map this out for you. But but realize that this is a very large investment for most people. Most first-time franchisees in QSR, particularly fast casual, are investing their life savings. They're usually pre-retiree, and want to take a chunk of their savings and give a go and take a risk and make an investment. And so, there is some consideration periods and some massaging conversational periods that play into it. So from the day you decide this is something I'm interested in to the day you open your restaurant franchise is probably every bit of 2 years.
Yeah, great. We're coming to the end of our time here for this first episode. And again, this is the first of 2 episodes. But I want to wrap up by giving each of you guys a chance to tell me what I didn't know enough to ask. What haven't I not asked about that I should have asked about that you'd like to sort of tell the listener? And again, the listener to this show is a potential franchisee, someone who's saying, hey, I might open my own place, I've got an idea, or I might explore the franchise path, and I'm just deciding which one, and I'm trying to understand what I can expect. So what else did I not think to ask? I'll start with Lauren.
Yeah, I think ask questions about required employees and sort of the staffing situation, because it's very difficult for you to build a model for a business as an owner and understand what your take-home salary is going to be if you don't really understand the staffing and labor model. That is a huge variable that a lot of franchisors are reluctant to comment on, but I think you need that piece of information because this isn't just about operating costs and food costs and pricing. That labor piece is very important too, and understanding what the unit level economics look like if you as an owner are in position as the manager of the unit versus you are just an operator and you have a team running it. I think many people, to Troy's point, buy this as sort of an investment and don't clearly understand how much work it's going to take on their side as an owner, or whether or not they need to be in position to make the unit level economics work. And simply put, are you buying yourself a job or are you buying yourself a profit stream? And I think I would submit that you almost always have to assume that you're buying yourself a job. It's very difficult to start a small business and for it to be mailbox money overnight. It almost never happens, especially in restaurants. So I always caution people, if you're buying a restaurant to collect a check, you better have a name tag too, because most owners I know are active in their business and there's no way around that.
Great. Darryl, what did I not think to ask so far? What else should we be talking about?
Well, I think the point of the independent or the franchise model question is a big one to look at, and I think that of course I'm a fan of the franchise industry, but I would caution any of the viewers that if they're struggling with, do I do this independently or do I do it as a franchise system? I would absolutely hands down go with the franchise system, and reinforce the fact that again it's about the learning curve, and you are investing in a business. This you have to build this thing. Just because you're buying a franchise doesn't give you the right to print money and just sit back on your beach chair. You're going to have to roll up your sleeves, but at least you have some guidance and some direction and some coaching and support to go along with this. Otherwise, if you go the independent route, you're on your own, and it's going to be a tough slog.
I think that's fair. Great, Troy. Same question to you.
Yeah. So one person we left out of the ecosystem I want to call out is legal counsel, right? So we talked about a broker, advisor, or consultant on the front end to source and guide and educate. We talked about the need for a validator. You need to speak to multiple people in the system that can tell you the truth and take some of the gloss off of the shiny sales brochure and sales pitch you're getting and get into the nuts and bolts of the reality. We talked about an internal mentee in the system, a community, having people that have done this in this system and will help you aside from the franchisor. But there's a lot to this from a legal and regulatory standpoint. I mentioned the realtor. Please don't make a phone call to any for lease sign in a strip mall without a commercial restaurant specific realtor on your side. And Chip, you and I and Lauren have a friend who we can refer you to, or many. The last part though is Uncle Bob, your family attorney, or the lawyer, the attorney that your kids play baseball, together, is not necessarily the right counsel for guiding you through this process. Franchising is a very, very specific contract-based, long-term relationship-based agreement. There's a lot of regulatory. There's a lot of sensitive information around disclosure, what can and can't and shouldn't be shared. And there can be negotiation, and sometimes there's zero negotiation by the franchisor. So you need somebody who really understands not only franchising, certainly at the very bare minimum, but most likely franchising in the restaurant space or in the industry specific that you're considering. Because I think that's the team, and you have to have all of that on your side to have the proper amount of information to make this level of an investment.
Yeah, great. I'm going to go around and ask one more question because I think, haven't talked about this enough, and it's finally something I'm hearing a lot of people talk about the last, I'll say, 5 years, and this is the idea of an exit strategy. I spend a lot of time talking with the independent operators that I coach with about an exit strategy because it just makes too much sense to me. Talk to me about, in a franchise model, how do you think about it as a franchisee? And from you guys, certainly as in a consulting capacity, how do you like to talk to? How do you like to talk about this? And I'm assuming you talk about this. Lauren, kick us off.
Yeah. Wow. This one's right in my lane. So I have seen a number of deals of every color, both independent and franchised. And what I will out of the box say is, generally speaking, as a franchisee, be aware that there is almost universally going to be a right of first refusal to purchase your units by the franchisor. They are not obligated to do that, but they may exercise their rights. So you may want to go shop the brand to the marketplace and be surprised, pleasantly or otherwise, to find out that the franchisor wants your units instead. And that's a thing. It happens. And so those terms are written into franchise agreements on purpose. It also allows the franchisor to purchase the units and refranchise them to somebody else. So the minute you put your units up for sale, you have to understand that your market isn't the entire universe. It's actually got to go through a gate first where the franchisor either exercises their right of first refusal and also has a right to approve a transfer to an incoming franchisee. So you've got some caveats. Now, as such, when we're talking about valuations, as a general rule of thumb, if your size of your franchised organization, let's say you've got north of 8 units, whatever the multiple is in the marketplace for that as an independent concept, you can take about 1.5 to 2 points off of that valuation because it's franchised. And I know that sounds kind of mind-blowing to people, but that is because of the very things I just discussed. The market is limited in who the buyers can actually be. And you have limitations in the term of your franchise agreement. Now, that's just something to be aware of. It's not scary. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a great thing. I sold my units to the parent company. It happens all the time. So I just want to make that designation and that distinction there. Independent brands that grow to that size, the whole brand is probably being sold at that point with multiple company stores and maybe even a few franchised units. And as such, there's a wider universe of potential buyers. And that's why you see those deals typically, when they're at scale and they're able to be purchased by private equity, are going to have a valuation that's a couple points higher than their franchisee counterpart, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful. Darryl, talk to me about exit strategy, how you think about it and how you coach on this.
Yeah, so, of course, I don't recommend ever getting into any business decision, franchised or otherwise, without having your, your plan A, your plan B, and your exit figured out. So from that perspective, of course, it's something that is a must. Lauren, everything that you just said is absolutely correct in the franchise industry. Like, a franchisor has to protect their brand. So, if let's just pick on bikers, for example. Say somebody comes to the table and has millions in cash and, just because they can afford to buy a franchisee's business doesn't mean that the franchisor will let that person in, because they have to protect their brand to that. So, of course, but then the other thing that I do caution franchisees on is that your franchisor is not your exit strategy. Because when I was a franchisor, I had franchisees say, well, you know what, I kind of want to move out to the West Coast or something like this, will you just buy my business and so I can just head out? And it's like, you guys, like, I have my own franchisees to operate. I have my own corporate stores to run. I'm not your exit strategy. So, so from that perspective, don't look at the franchisor as the exit strategy, but absolutely do create one before you get into business.
So can I ask another silly question before I bounce to Troy? So you're going a couple of years, it's not going well. You're going to try and look for a buyer, but no one's going to buy a failing business. The franchisor isn't going to necessarily buy the unit back. Is it realistic to say you just then close? That's it? Sunk costs, you lose out on it, just like any other business?
It's often what happens. Yeah.
Great. So that happens more often. That happens more often than not.
Yes, I would say so, but would also say franchisors have to report those closures in their FDD, and I would hope and submit that most franchisors will work very hard with a franchisee to make sure a closure is not on their books. But I have equally seen many who don't offer assistance or don't have a program in place or a strategy to help save failing stores. And I think that that's something you should be looking for, and maybe that's a good question to ask, of a franchisor that you're vetting. Like, hey, what happens if a store's underperforming? What kind of support do you offer in addition to your normal support to franchisees who are underperforming? But I would agree with Darryl, like, never assume a franchisor is going to bail you out. That is not what they're there for. Absolutely.
I love it. Mm-hmm. Troy, I'll let you weigh in on the exit strategy question.
Yeah, we often run into a reality check brick wall when a franchisee is looking at this, when somebody's properly giving advice to say, you have to have the what ifs. To Darryl's ABC scenario, what if this, what if that? There's a lot in that. And so everything you are investigating, considering, weighing, and learning about has to be through the lens of, great, it's going to happen, it's going to work, all's going to be good. But you got to think about worst case scenarios and variables outside of your control, and what is the brand's strength, right? What happens if the brand itself is struggling and can't seem to gain traction, et cetera. Real estate's a big piece of this. This is why you need lawyers, why you need realtors. What happens if you do fail in 2 or 3 or 4 years on a 10-year lease? And did you make a personal guarantee? Is the brand, I'll give you an example, Subway's famous for Subway being on the lease as a co-lessee, so that if you do fail, or if they don't want to renew you, or they do want to pull your franchise back from your poor performance or whatever, they have the ability to keep that store open without ever closing it. Right? They send a SWAT team in and they take over the store. So this is in the fine print of the FDD and the agreements and et cetera that has to be considered. But yes, you need to have the thought of, okay, I'm signing a 10-year franchise agreement, a 10-year lease. I'm on a personal guarantee for X period. What are the implications if things don't work out the way we hope they work out? Or if God forbid, something bad happens in your life, or medical or otherwise, you have to have these contingencies. So insurances are important, and across the board, there's a lot of considerations that I think when you look at the 20-line item P&L, you don't really think about the finer points that add up within that consideration.
Yeah, I love it. Guys, this is great. This has been the first part of, again, a 2-part conversation, a roundtable. I've put together a panel who are much smarter than I am in regards to franchising. I always try to surround myself with very, very smart people. We've done so today. Again, this is a franchise roundtable. This first episode of 2 episodes is all about looking at the franchisee side of things. Somebody says, hey, I think I want to buy into a franchise. What should they be looking at? What are their considerations? All of that. I think the big takeaway is you need counsel. You need to ask a lot of questions. You need to get good at asking a lot of questions. To mitigate that risk, really make sure you understand what you're getting into. I'm going to put contact information for all 3, for Lauren, Darryl, and Troy. That's going to be in the show notes. I'm going to let them share more information at the end of next week's episode, so you got to come back, you got to tune in. They'll have more to share then, but rest assured, all their information you can find in the show notes. I hope you come back next week for the next part, the second piece to this conversation, where we're looking at everything on the franchisor side. Really, what should a brand be thinking about, looking to do? How do they grow, and how do they know if they're ready to grow, and if franchising is the right path as opposed to opening a bunch of corporate stores? Lauren, Darryl, Troy, I appreciate you being here. I look forward to having you back next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chip.
Once again, I want to thank our distinguished panel for taking time out of their day to sit and chat with me. Again, this is the first of 2 episodes all about franchising this week and next. Do not miss the follow-up conversation on next week's episode of the Restaurant Strategy Podcast. As always, I appreciate you guys being here. My name is Chip Close. This is Restaurant Strategy. If you are interested in learning more about my P3 Mastermind, get in touch. restaurantstrategypodcast.com/schedule a free 30-minute strategy session. I get to learn more about you and your restaurant. You get to ask questions about the program. We'll see if you're a good fit for the program. If we decide yes, then we could talk about next steps there. But that free call is the best way to get started, and there is no pressure to join us. Just get on a call. We'll chat. I love getting to know more of the listeners, getting to hear your stories. Again, visit that website. That link is in the show notes, and I will see you next time.